Well, I'm John Moorhead, and I'm privileged to have today someone whose work I've followed for a good while and continue to enjoy, and that is Daniel S. Wise. And I'm going to read his little bio that he's got out there that I picked up. Daniel, if there's anything you want to add to that, feel free.
Okay.
Daniel is an independent researcher with a PhD in religious studies from the University of Virginia, whose research focuses on paranormal belief and other aspects of the evolving contemporary American religious landscape. Daniel, do you want to add anything to that, or is that good?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, my dissertation was on ghost hunting in America, and the way I got away with that, you would say, in a religious studies department, is I made it about what does enchantment look like in late modernity, and I feel like to really understand that you need a good example, and so my example was 21st century ghost hunting. Like if we examine this phenomenon, we can understand what it looks like to have an enchanted worldview in late modernity.
Yeah, we'll be talking and unpacking some of that. The title for that dissertation, 21st Century American Ghost Hunting, a Late Modern Enchantment. Thank you for making that available to me. I appreciate it. You can find Daniel's contact information in the program notes. I do have Twitter information at Daniel S. Wise. Do you have a website that I'm
Yeah, danielswise.com.
Okay, I'll include mention of that as well. Well, thanks so much. We explore the paranormal in the context of religious studies from time to time, and this will be an exciting and interesting addition to that collection. But I always like to try and start on a personal note. How did you develop a personal interest, if not passion, and then later translate that into an academic interest in the paranormal?
Yeah, well, as a kid, I think I always thought the paranormal was cool, like a lot of kids. And in fact, yeah, I mean, I think the data shows many kids, pick it up from the media in whatever way. I was when I most of my childhood was before the ghost hunting show started airing, so I didn't watch much of those as a younger child. I was a teenager when those started airing, but so I was kind of interested in it in that way. I remember in the fourth grade, my school took a field trip. I grew up in Florida, and my school took a field trip to St. Augustine, which is the oldest continuously occupied European settlement in the United States. And it was settled by the Spanish in the 16th century. And one of the big things they do there are ghost tours. So I remember going there in the fourth grade. My dad thought it was a really cool place. So him and my mom stayed with me over the weekend after everyone else went back home. And we went on some ghost tours, and I was really fascinated by that. And eventually my dad actually he became involved in ghost hunting. My dad is a Lutheran pastor, so it's not like normal practice for someone like him, but he was really interested in the paranormal. He had some experiences when he was younger. He was interested in some photographs he had taken, and he got in contact with a team in Florida based out of Miami. And then the leader of that ghost hunting team, this is actually the first ghost hunter I ever interviewed. I found him through my dad. He convinced my dad to come on to go to cases where he thought he needed a clergy. So that would be cases where, often where something a little bit evil maybe is going on. And, my dad would, I guess basically cobble together, take the house blessing ritual that Lutherans use and tweak it a little bit to get rid of nasty spirits or whatever. So it was definitely a family affair. And I remember first thinking about ghost hunting as just a really interesting case of religious creativity. There's no official religious teachings on ghosts most of the time. So they're cobbling together all these different sources, all these different religious sources, and also pop psychology, and coming up with ideas about spirits and ideas of how to deal with spirits. So I thought that was really interesting and would be just a great topic for a religious studies lens.
So it was kind of just a natural progression for you from the personal to the academic?
Yeah, I mean, when I first went into academia, I actually did antiquity. I was in biblical studies. I took lots of Hebrew, lots of Greek, a little bit of Aramaic. Was doing a lot of Second Temple Judaism, early Christianity stuff. but I realized the stuff I'm really interested in, you can't really do with antiquity because we don't have the sources, like just like vernacular religion basically. And I was going to do intermediary figures like angels and demons in antiquity, and that kind of easily moved into spirits in contemporary America. So
Yeah. Now, what you mentioned, just one more little follow up on the personal interest. You mentioned media that might have influenced you. I'd be interested in knowing what kind of media. I'm a bit older. I grew up in the 70s, and we had these pseudo documentaries, and they were hosted by Rod Serling on UFOs and psychic phenomenon. We had In Search Of, hosted by Leonard Nimoy.
mhm.
And so that was the constant television diet that I saw that helped develop my interest as a kid that continued on. What kinds of media fueled your interest?
Actually have kind of a hard time remembering. My family was kind of into any kind of like supernatural or paranormal show. Like I remember watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Charmed, and there are also those still those like specials you're talking about. I read a lot of books, and there were a lot of books on topics like ghosts and the paranormal. And I remember sitting in the back of someone's SUV when I was like spending the night at their house, and we had to go somewhere at night, and I was just like poring over this book they had about anomalous phenomena. So it was actually a lot of books.
Okay.
Um, like one in particular I still own by Brad Steiger. I don't remember the
Okay.
title, but
Yeah.
there's a Brad Steiger book about like ghost encounters and weird things. And
Yeah.
and I remember reading that and thinking it was super cool, and then buying it as an adult. And I even cite it in my um do I might cite it in my dissertation, I'm not sure, but just as an example of like I compare stuff Brad Steiger says to stuff that was pioneered by Frederick Myers in the days of the Society for Psychical Research, and I show how like stuff that Myers discovered or pioneered still exists in popular culture today.
Yeah, it's fascinating how the stuff that we look at when we're young. I remember collecting. I would go to flea markets and garage sales, and they would sell. People would get rid of their paperback books, and I would pick up stuff by Hans Holzer on ghosts
Yeah.
and you name it. And I remember a Time Life book series on mysterious phenomenon, and that kind of stuff just fascinated me. So it's interesting to just hear those influences. So you have this personal interest, it becomes an academic interest. Your dissertation is on ghost hunting. What background and theoretical lenses did you bring to that research project?
Um, I mean, actually, so I've mainly been trained by historians, honestly. Just been I took like a class in ethnography, and I as an American religion being trained in American religion, I read various ethnographies, like Courtney Bender's The New Metaphysicals, Marie Griffith's God's Daughter. So I had read other people do this. So it was a little bit of a leap, but I guess I basically just like treated I don't know, I guess I just had the impulse to act like an historian using more recent sources. My original project was going to be just going through ghost hunting media as if like someone studying the 19th century would go through 19th century documents and just like coming to conclusions that way. But then I realized it was just so much easier just to ask my questions to ghost hunters directly. So I kind of developed that. So I guess like just like ethnography of religious studies is some method. Just the way of like the ways you would look through. Well, I guess I should say a lot of the theory I used came from the study of new religious movements and metaphysical religion.
Okay.
Um, so, for instance, in my science chapter, I have a section where I talk about, insights that certain scholars have had into, people like um, Hanegraaff and stuff like that, like the insights they have into scientific metaphysical religion, and I talk about how those apply to ghost hunting as well. Those have kind of provided the background because there isn't much written on ghost hunters. There is a
Right.
book out now by Mark Eaton, but that didn't come out till after my dissertation was pretty much completed. So I basically had to rely on, the stuff people did analyzing metaphysical religion, new religious movements, that type of thing.
Okay.
And then I also have a chapter where I rely on Rudolf Otto, which is kind of like, very, maybe my advisor was like, can you also use something a little newer? Because he's like early 20th century, but I really thought that his concept of how people experience the numinous kind of applied to how ghost hunters experience demons, just like the terror, but it's actually ends up being like a divine experience, that type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, Otto is a go-to for Pete's sake. I mean, especially in monster theory, you see that all the
Right.
time. So it's kind of interesting how contemporary folks expect you. Of course, you want your research to be contemporary and current and that kind of thing, and speak to modern readers. But just because something was written a few decades ago doesn't mean that it's still not significant. So
Well, I think one of the problems too is that Otto has taken a beating by like the Russell McCutcheon School of Religious Studies. The idea that it's foolish for religious studies scholars to think Otto is a real scholar because he's like so steeped in theology and
Right.
this idea that he kind of sees religion as sui generis, like not something that is constructed by social forces. But ever since then you've had monster theorists pick him up now, and also sorry, I'm trying to think of a name that's a really well-known name that for some reason it's slipping my mind.
It's all right.
Robert Orsi. Robert Orsi
Okay.
has I guess fairly recently defended Otto as a useful scholar. So yeah, I can kind of understand like why you'd be wary of someone just going for Otto and not doing anything more recent. But I did, of course, end up putting in a little bit of more recent monster theory, which itself was also based on Otto, actually. So
Right. Well, just out of curiosity, I've noticed, I'm sure you have too, a lot of the treatments of the paranormal, you tend to come into these two camps, either what I call the true believer, where they're arguing for the validity of a given phenomenon, or the skeptic and the debunking approach. Personally, I'm not interested in either one of those. I'm more interested in what does the continued fascination of large numbers of people in American culture who believe in one or more, paranormal phenomena. What does that tell us about our contemporary religious and spiritual quest? Do you fall on either side of that, or are you sympathetic to my perspective, or where are you coming from in your research?
I think I'm sympathetic to your perspective. Like, it's not like I'm not interested in whether ghosts exist, but like, that's not my expertise. I can't contribute there, you know. So I take like what I would call an agnostic position in my research, and I kind of do that intentionally, where I'm like, I'm not going to say whether or not ghosts exist. That's not my concern. My concern is how social forces come in to the quest for discovering ghosts. So I basically talk about, I think I mentioned that in my dissertation, where I'm just like, I'm not, the point isn't whether ghosts exist or not. And I tell that to the ghost hunters I interview as well. Like, I'm not trying to prove ghosts or disprove ghosts exist. I just want to understand the human aspects of ghost hunting. And I
Right.
want to understand, yeah, sort of like what you said, what does it say about our culture that this is such a fascination and that type of thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me that you chose this as a dissertation topic, that you were bold enough to do that in religious studies, and that you got it approved. It was interesting. I have been slowly watching some of the videos of the recent conference on the impossible and the paranormal at Rice University. And in one of the panel discussions, they mentioned some of the presenters that they were interested in doing this in their PhD work, but they were always steered away from it. Because it was, at least at that time, it was still very controversial. Did you face any challenges at the university in getting your topic approved? Did you have to make any modifications?
Yeah. So I think I had this idea. Like I said, I started my PhD program studying antiquity.
Right.
But then I came to a crisis where I was like, I don't feel satisfied. I'm under so much pressure. And I thought about leaving grad school. So I basically had nothing to lose. I was like planning to just quit my PhD program. But then like I got the idea after talking to one of my, trusted advisors from undergrad and my master's program, he was like, well, what are you really interested in? And he was like, well, why don't you try that? And so I kind of weaseled my way into American religion, because like I was already a funded PhD. All the religion, American religion people had to do was say yes to take, because I had my line of funding already. So my advisor, Matt Hedstrom, was kind of just like, why not? Let's take a chance on it. And I didn't originally come in saying I was going to study the paranormal, even though that was kind of an idea. I thought about maybe studying evangelicalism. I thought about maybe when I started thinking about the paranormal stuff, like at first, people kind of steered me to like, maybe I should do psychical research, something on psychical research in the 19th and early 20th century. That's a little more respectable. That's like history of some people far away, right? And and also it makes sense for my advisor to say that, because my advisor's advisor was a William James scholar. So like getting into psychical research, you can get into William James a little bit, study the trajectories of 20th century American liberal religion. And then I just very slowly like ended up just like slowly moving it up, and like and then like I said originally, it was going to be like I'm looking at ghost hunters books and podcasts and stuff like that and studying it that way. And then eventually I was just like, I'm going to interview ghost hunters,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he, my advisor was very, he understood my vision, especially when I framed it in terms of enchantment. And also his book is on liberal religion in the 20th century, especially as it's displayed in reading groups and like book culture. But he teaches a class on called Spiritual but Not Religious, on American spirituality. And he talks about spiritualism in that class and that type of thing. So he kind of understood why it would be significant. Um, there are definitely people in my department who would not have accepted a dissertation like this. It was just that my advisor was open to it.
Yeah, yeah. It's one thing when you're planning your dissertation and your research and all that, and then when you get into it, you can take on contours and directions that you never thought. What were some aha moments you had during your research and writing of the dissertation? What sticks out for you?
Oh, let me think here. Um, if there's any graduate students watching this, like if you ever feel like you're not going to finish your dissertation, like I felt that way. Like there were years where I seriously thought I'm just killing time right now until while I still have funding. I'm not going to finish this. I had some mental health problems, and I just felt directionless and motivationless. And I was like, I'm honestly not, there's no way I'm completing a book length research project. But eventually I just started writing, like I remember like taking I started with the scientism chapter, scientism and ghost hunting. And I wrote it while teaching media studies. And then I sent it to Hedstrom, my advisor, and he was like, he like in the nicest way possible was like, this is a mess. Like he never said anything like that, but he like was like, he talked about specific points where like where I wasn't like, nailing, I wasn't focusing in enough, and I was being just like making broad sweeps. Um, and then eventually, this actually was like kind of during the pandemic. During the pandemic, I just like I don't know if I had nothing else to do, or if it was just like something about the world being shut down, and I just was in my internal world. I just started writing, and then I sent off the chapter to my advisor, and he was like, "This looks like a chapter," and I was like, I got more and more motivated, and I was just kind of shocked. But yeah, I mean, one of the moments where things changed was when I decided to actually interview ghost hunters. I was like, there's no way I'm going to do an ethnography project. No way I'm going to do that. That's too much trouble. And then I just started doing it. Um, I'm trying to think of.
Were they open to that type of interaction? Was there any defensiveness or skepticism, or did they welcome this
I
academic?
have had a surprise. The people I found easiest to work with ethnography wise are ghost hunters.
Hmm.
They want to tell you about what's going on. They a lot of them, they love to talk. They just want to tell you about their world and what they've discovered and what's going on. Also, I think they like the idea of like I'm like an academic asking to hear from them. So I think a lot of them feel like they're getting legitimacy by speaking to me. Um, but yeah, so I found them, a lot of ghost hunters, really willing to talk. I've also tried to talk to people who are Halloween enthusiasts, and maybe the fact that that's such a weird thing, like, what, you're studying me because I like Halloween? Like, they don't know what I'm, and they're like, please do not message me, and like,
Yeah, yeah.
I've tried working with like neo-pagan witchy communities, and I've like come up with some trouble where like because they feel like they're already judged and oppressed by the greater
Right.
wider religious culture, and I'm just like some like you know guy with like an academic gaze trying to come in and deconstruct or whatever. So I've had some trouble with that. But basically, of the communities I've tried working with, ghost hunters have been the easiest to work with.
Well, if you ever want to continue that research along in the Halloween community or neo-pagan, I've got a foot in both of those worlds. So let me know.
Yeah.
Both areas of fascination. Uh, when you did your ethnography and your interviews, were you able to discern any kind of what varied spiritualities or religious influences or background do they bring to ghost hunting?
Yeah, I found that most ghost hunters, like most Americans, had a Christian background, and but most ghost hunters did not adhere to it anymore. They moved more into like the non-affiliated spiritual but not religious, like that type of zone. Most of the ghost hunters I spoke to, I have come across atheist ghost hunters, which is interesting because they're generally atheists but not materialists. I've come across people who are still religious, like this couple that still goes to their Baptist church every Sunday, even though they've gotten a little bit of pushback for their interest in the paranormal. But most of them were like, oh, I was raised Methodist, but for this or that reason, like generally the reasons of everyone who leaves church, I left church, and now this is how I understand the divine. I know there's a God because of what I've discovered investigating. I know there's a spirit world, and I'm comforted by what I've discovered. Um, and this kind of fits with like our the evidence shows that those who go to church weekly and those who never go to church, who are atheists, those two groups are the least likely to hold paranormal beliefs. And by paranormal beliefs, I mean those beliefs that are duly rejected by mainstream science and traditional religion, like UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, psychics. But those people who go to church like maybe like once a month, the people in that range, the middle range, are the most likely to hold paranormal beliefs. And sociologists have theorized this is because they're open to the supernatural, but not so committed to one traditional religious vision that their beliefs are outlawed by their belief system.
Yeah, that makes sense. Did you discover, did they reveal any kind of explanatory hypothesis they may have? Were they just interested in trying to experience the phenomenon, or do they try and bring some of this is what it is, deceased personalities, or what have you?
Could you rephrase that?
Yeah, yeah. When you interviewed the ghost hunters, did you get a sense that there are certain ways in which they're trying to explain the phenomena, what ghosts are?
Yes, sometimes they are. I mean, honestly, a lot of investigation is just getting evidence of life after death. Just like, I asked a question, I get an EVP, an electronic voice phenomenon, that sounds like an answer. When there was no one there, that's evidence of the afterlife, and that's what they're after. And it's a thrilling to come up with this evidence. And they
Right.
also want to discover, who caused the haunting, like what kind of person is haunting it, why are they haunting it, how many spirits are there. But a smaller subset of investigations are trying to discover things about the spirit world, where they ask questions about the afterlife. Though a lot of ghost hunters will tell you that's fraud, and ghost spirits don't want to talk about it, and that type of thing. So there is a little bit of like theorizing and actually investigating to discover those secrets. You'll have people. I don't know. I guess there's less theorizing than you would expect.
Okay.
Like, I think they have an opinion about the afterlife, but they're not really testing hypotheses through investigation a lot of the time about the afterlife. Um, there's just all kinds of ideas about the afterlife that a lot of them reflect popular culture. Like people can go to the light, maybe, a lot of ghost hunters, maybe there's heaven, fewer people believe in hell. You go to the light, and some people are stuck in between because they didn't want to leave, or they had unfinished business, or that type of thing, or somehow they didn't know they could go on to the light. um, this type of thing. Um, yeah, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit
Yeah,
here,
no,
but
that's an area that I think would be very interesting for, in-depth analysis on its own. What is informing, what are the resources they're drawing from, whether it's elements of some kind of residual Christianity, generic afterlife beliefs, horror films,
yeah,
this kind of thing.
I mean, they're drawing on all those things for sure. I
Right.
talk a little about that. I talk about like how there's a general like vernacular Christianity that forms like the basis of most ghost hunters' belief, where like there is a God, there's a soul that can be separate from the body, there is an afterlife that you can go to, and staying behind is an intermediate phase. I would call that like vernacular Christianity. It draws from Christianity, but it's kind of like a popular version with some distinctives taken away. And then you'll have people who hold like the spiritualist idea, where like spirits, the afterlife looks like spirits constantly ascending higher and higher, and the spirits that are left behind for us to experience often are the ones who need to ascend in knowledge and goodness, and things like that. um yeah, I think those are like kind of the main sources for afterlife belief. I I I haven't heard very many ghost hunters talk about reincarnation. Actually,
Hmm.
I'm sure some do,
Right,
but
right.
I haven't heard anyone tell me these ghosts are here in between reincarnations. I haven't really heard
Right.
very many people tell me that.
I would
And
assume
it's
that
definitely,
what we used to call the New Age movement might provide
yeah.
some kind of pop culture resources. My wife was watching a program over the weekend, and this family, they were trying to help this family with a hoarding problem, and they couldn't move further because they thought the place was haunted. So they called a gentleman in who burned sage and tried to capture a spirit in a gourd. And it just reminded me of kind of a new age kind of twist on his particular view of haunting and that kind of thing.
Yeah, they're definitely new age spirituality. I guess what I would call metaphysical religion
Yeah.
plays a huge role. Um, where especially with like cleansing, but even like metaphysical religion has ideas about like moving into the light, right? And like you want to visualize light, or you want to visualize the movement of energy, that type of thing. Um, yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, also in your dissertation, you talk about how ghost hunting and the paranormal serves as a form of enchantment. Can you unpack that? For just say a little bit about disenchantment as it relates to enchantment for viewers and listeners who may not be familiar with this, and how do you see ghost hunting fitting into that?
Yeah, so this whole dialogue, so a lot of times when I talk to people who aren't in the academic study of religion, or aren't into the academic study of modernity, they don't know what I mean by enchantment. um, so basically this whole discussion of enchantment is, you can kind of trace it back to Max Weber in the early 20th century. And he was a sociologist. He was a pioneering sociologist. He helped establish the field, and he was definitely a theorist of modernity. And he argued that um, enchantment, he argued that disenchantment would advance in Western societies, um, as modernity was advancing. So science, bureaucratization, rationalization, all of these things would lead to less and less enchantment. And by that, he meant there would be less recourse to magic and the supernatural and that type of thing, and mysterious forces, because as modernity advances, more and more things become in principle calculable by rational means. So for instance, like, you know uh, he uses the example of a streetcar. A man riding a streetcar in the early 20th century, he doesn't necessarily understand how the streetcar works, but in principle he could understand it because it could all be calculable, and he doesn't have to say that these forces are magical or anything like that. um, so for a while this was like, you know the theory to refer to. As we move into the 20th century, scholars assume that the West is becoming less enchanted and will become disenchanted. and this sort of thing. You know, you have this talk of the death of God in like the 1960s and that sort of thing. You know, the assumption being that modernity is advancing and God will die, right? In people's belief at least. And but then what was interesting is like people started pushing back against this narrative, because by the time you get to like the 1980s, like maybe 1970s, but especially into the 1980s, you have the rise of the religious right, you have new age spirituality flourishing, and people start saying, it looks like, traditional, and also traditional religious affiliation, didn't really start declining in any way. It depends on who you ask whether it was declining or not, but it didn't start declining in any way until, like the late 70s or something like that. So people start wondering, maybe disenchantment isn't all it's cracked up to be. Maybe the theory isn't exactly what we think. Now we're getting to the point where scholars would say that enchantment is booming. There's like a new consensus that enchantment is booming. So maybe it's true that traditional religious affiliation is declining, but the number of atheists and agnostics has remained stagnant over, for example, the past 7 years, while the religiously unaffiliated has grown. So the idea is that people have enchanted beliefs in mystery, magic, the supernatural. Now we just look at the ways in which modernity has changed that enchantment. So enchantment in the late 19th century would look like, going to church every Sunday for a lot of people. Enchantment in the early 21st century for a lot of people looks like ghost hunting, or, working with crystals, or doing meditation and yoga or mindfulness and that type of thing. So just to like summarize, starting with Max Weber, we believed that there would be less and less enchantment as modernity advanced in the West. Toward the late 20th century into the 21st century, a new consensus arose that enchantment would persist. It would just change with modernity. It would just look different. And so I was trying to study what enchantment looked like in late modernity, because we knew it would be different. And I used ghost hunting as an example of what this new enchantment looks like. You're muted, I think. You're muted.
Let's try that. There we go.
There you
go. Thanks for the reminder. Trying to keep the animal noises down on this end.
Yeah.
That's very helpful as background there. One of the chapters in your dissertation that was especially intriguing to me was on ghost hunter spirituality. So how would you see ghost hunting functioning as a form of re-enchantment and as a spirituality for at least some of them?
Yeah, so I would say ghost hunting itself is a spiritual practice overall, because it's about, well, you could say it's spiritual in several ways. Like, it deals with the supernatural. You could define spirituality in a certain way where it's whatever deals with the supernatural, and ghost hunting deals with the supernatural. It also gets toward the big questions in life, like what happens when we die. What kinds of forces are at work in the universe? Is there a greater order to things? And a lot of people who ghost hunt aren't satisfied receiving the answers to those questions from traditional religion. Like, I heard a guy told me once, like, well, you're telling me, all this stuff from old books, but I've experienced things myself when I ghost hunt. Right. So the idea is that it's a really empirical spirituality. Like, a lot of people have, like, in late modernity, a lot of people have an empirical spirituality. They want to experience things themselves. They want to have a religious experience of their own, not just rely on the religious experiences recorded in ancient texts. So in this way, ghost hunters experience spiritual realities for themselves when they believe they interact with spirits. Also, what's interesting spirituality wise is just how eclectic ghost hunter spirituality is. Like, the sources they draw on to define what a spirit is, and especially in their rituals to remove spirits, it's just fascinating what they combine. There's like Native American spirituality with the burning of sage, which itself has become controversial because some people argue that's cultural appropriation.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're trying to navigate that in the ghost hunting community. There's the use of metaphysical or new age religion, where you use crystals to direct energy and move spirits. I've talked to several people who use Reiki, directing energy with their hands, when they're cleansing a house from spirits. Catholic, like sort of like popular Catholic demonology is super influential in ghost hunting circles. What the stuff that came from Ed and Lorraine Warren,
Right.
there's like there's the Catholic influence. There's a parapsychology influence where people talk about, what causes poltergeist. Is poltergeist really telekinesis? So there's a parapsychology drawing on. There's like pop psychology, where like people have these ideas about, meditation and also like ideas about how the mind works and you can apply that to spirits. Yeah, I mean, all kinds of stuff they draw on. And then you get little snippets of other things, like, for a while there was the popularity of Dybbuk boxes, the idea that there was a Jewish spirit, in a box. And then some people talk about jinns, which is a Muslim spirit. Yeah, it's just like, basically it mirrors what I argue in my dissertation is this mirrors the contemporary religious landscape. People build their spiritualities like a patchwork quilt. Whatever appeals to them or seems reasonable to them, they draw on. And so this is how they build ghost belief. They draw on whatever seems interesting or whatever they feel like works. They'll draw on that and to form the picture of ghosts and how they should be treated.
Yeah, one final question for you here, unless I've missed something here. I'll give you an opportunity to answer the question I didn't ask. You've got several articles. I'll put a link in the program notes at Religion Dispatches, where you have tackled various contemporary phenomenon, and you make the argument, or the argument comes through, whether you're trying to make it in a given article or not, that the popularity of certain paranormal phenomenon is telling us something significant about contemporary America and its spiritual landscape. What would you say to the average individual and also the scholar who is fairly dismissive of the paranormal about why this is something significant, regardless of your bias, even if you think it's bunk or they're gullible people, whatever? Why is it something we should be taking a look at and pay attention to?
Well, I would say the paranormal is normal. Just statistically, most people in the United States have a paranormal belief. And the percentage of people goes from like 52% to 60 something percent, depending on what you ask about in the survey. So it's just a normal thing. So like if it's insane or crazy, then you have to be saying the majority of Americans are crazy, which I know some like skeptics and science advocates would want to say that, but I wouldn't want to say that. And the fact is, as traditional religious affiliation declines, we're going to see greater and greater paranormal belief in society. That's just what the evidence seems to show. Sociologists Bader, Baker, and Mencken of the book Paranormal America. It's a great book, Paranormal America. So read it if you're interested in this. But at the end, they very cautiously, as sociologists, project what will happen, and they project a growth of paranormal belief. And basically, paranormal belief is like it's the form that spirituality is increasingly taking in society. So if you want to understand American religiosity and spirituality, you need to understand paranormal belief.
Yeah. I agree completely. I think you're onto something. That's why I appreciate the work that you're doing and everything that you're writing for Religion Dispatches and elsewhere as an independent scholar. I try to come up with questions for guests that I think kind of covers the basis of their work, but I know since it's not my work that I'm probably missing something. Is there something that you wish I would have asked that you'd like to share?
I don't know. I think you did a pretty good job. I can't think of anything I've been dying to say right now.
Do you have any future projects? Anything ongoing?
Yeah, I've been having a little bit of trouble deciding what to do. So I'm working on getting a book on my dissertation out. I don't have a publisher or anything yet, and I'm adding a little bit to the book manuscript. So there's that. And then as for the next project, I'm thinking about sort of theorizing the demonic, how ghost hunters view the demonic, because I know we need more work on the modern demonic. I would say, we have a lot of, as my friend Joe Laycock was talking to me about, how we have a lot of work on early modern witchcraft and demonology, but not as much, on modern demonology. So it'd be interesting to try to fill some of that gap.
Yeah, that would be huge. And there's plenty of research material sources that you could interact out there with you. I mean, just tons of it. So
Yeah.
especially in connection with contemporary satanic panic phenomenon that goes on, and how contemporary demonology tends to hover in the background for that. So that would be fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, Daniel, I want to thank you again for coming on the program. Hopefully folks will find what you're doing of interest. Again, in the program notes, I'll include your bio and links to what you're doing so that folks can seek it out.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks again for coming.
All right. Bye.